Welcome back to Mythic Dungeon International. Of course, if you'd like to support WoW Esports, especially the next two teams who've already qualified for BlizzCon, be sure to check out the Transmorpher Beacon or the Hoarder Alliance fireworks, as proceeds go to the prize pool for BlizzCon at the end of the year. I'm Jag. Joining me right now for this Method v Method matchup, we've got Sloot, Sierra, and Zyronic. And guys, only one team today is going to be able to get that extra big hug from SCO at the end of it. One of these Method teams needs to win to knock out the other, Sloot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, it's going to be a bit of a nostalgia feel to the teams, right? I mean, it's just the rematch of the championship series that we saw in Australia at the spring MDI final earlier this year. So, you know, probably a bit of nerves from Method EU coming into this. Method NA certainly want to stand their ground and show that they are now the big brother fit. I mean, but one thing's for sure, at the end of this, a Method team is going to win, Jack.
Really? That's the most stunning insight I've seen all day. Thank you so much.
Been working on that one for a few hours.
You know, it must have been. Fortified Raging Necrotic starting us off onto the Underrot. And Zyronic, these have been some incredibly debilitating affixes these teams have to go up against. And very annoying affixes, I should say.
Yeah, looking at the dungeon on paper, it seems like one of the worst affix dungeons. Like we were talking about it before the cup today. Like this looks nasty.
Nasty.
But every single run we've seen so far has been, for the most part, pretty clean. And it seems like it should be nasty with the Arcade Emissary, sorry, the Tides Emissary, and there being the main focus. But teams seem like they have pretty solid strategies for this dungeon already.
You're absolutely right, Zynasty. It's just a lot of, like, the problem is that, you know, these teams have, it's something I don't think we've really talked about enough today, and we should continue to talk about, are essences. Essences are a huge new factor and player power bump for these teams.
Without a doubt. And you can always check out those essences using our Inspect feature as the extension that you'll see on the left side of your screen with tooltips powered by Wowhead. Be sure to check them out as we enter Game 1 between Method NA and Method EU on the Underrot.
Sarah, this is going to be a big one. This is going to be Method EU's chance at redemption after that. I mean, after that, you know, just loss. Kind of embarrassing for them, loss 0-3 against Method NA. Something that nobody was really expecting.
Yeah, no one was really expecting it onto that one. I'm Sierra now, and your pocket healer now for forever.
I'm Jack. Or who am I? Am I Nagura?
You like bump up the chair a lot.
I'm Daniel.
Prepare to die.
There's nobody on the desk by this name. Nobody on the desk by this name. We're getting a quick restart before we get into it, making sure everybody's ready, the correct affixes, all the gear, everything else they want. But essences, Sloot, tell me a little bit about those. What have we been seeing out of the tanks thus far?
Yeah, so I mean, in general, essences are something that we didn't have in the previous season period. It's just it's a new system that Blizzard has introduced in 8.2 that essentially kind of, if you played in Legion, a bit artifact style. You know, you have new power nodes that give you just substantial player power bumps with the first major, usually a 2 or 3 minute cooldown. It can vary, lower ones for caster for some of the healers, for instance, but it provides just a huge bump in power. And then at certain neck levels, 55 and 65, you get some minor slots to further enhance your power. And it just, I mean, it could be anything from just passive versatility to just, you know, we were talking about Lucid Dreams earlier, for instance, a 2 minute on-use cooldown that decreases resource use by 50%, or increases resource gen by 50% for 15 seconds. So, you know, just the combination of these, you can try to go support, you can try to go AoE damage, you can try to go single target damage. So that's part of the reason you're seeing such huge damage bumps from some of the healers on single target. They're running Crucible of Flame at rank 3 with both stacks, and it's many possibilities.
Yep, it's very heavy onto that one. I also like being able to see that Conflict and Strife trade. There's been a couple of classes that'll actually use the major effect, using that PvP talent, but that stacking versatility, Sierra, has been massive for healer DPS and also helps their healing as well.
Definitely. I mean, when we look at the healers and what essences they're using, there's a couple of ways of doing it. Like Sloot said, you've got the full offensive route. This is what most of the healers are tending to go for. That concentrated flame is absolutely huge. Fits really nicely, certainly for Holy Paladins as well. We saw the Ellesmere, I think he had that on as one of the secondaries, just bumping up his damage a little bit more. For Paladins, they can get reduction on wings, the major cooldown, just to pump out huge amounts of damage. Again, you can use things like Lucid Dreams, give yourself more mana, which means you don't have to sit and drink as much. So it can be, you know, you gain time not necessarily by doing more throughput or doing more damage. You gain it by not having to, you know, stop your team from pulling more.
Yeah, and also with Lucid Dreams, I believe it was Titles who had mentioned it previously. Zyro, you probably correct me on this one as well, that it's also going to be giving them energy regen as well whenever they switch up into cat form.
Yeah, Lucid Dreams Minor is that every single time you use a resource-using ability, you have a chance to get half of it back. So like you're mentioning with mana, whenever a healer casts mana, a heal, they have a chance to get 50% of it back. And every single time that happens, they also get a nice little chunk of versatility for 8 seconds, too. Same thing for rogues. Whenever they use anything that uses energy, they get half the energy back and a bunch of versatility as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of power creep right now. And something to mention, these guys are set to 65 next, so they have a minor and a major and 3 minors, which most people still don't have on live yet.
That's true. There's like probably a handful of people who've been crazy enough to farm for it and go for it, but speaking of which, we're all set and ready to go for this one, as Underrot is ready to go between Method NA and Method EU.
No, sorry, I think I had a bit of a deja vu here with restarting maps with you on the desk with me today. But nonetheless, here we are in this Method v Method Titan Fest between the two teams. You already see Method NA here on the left side of the screen has opted to skip past that first Matron pack right down into the very dangerous Mask pack, just trying to cleave everything down and make sure that Mask is locked down, not channeling anything. While Method EU going for a more traditional route, I would say, here at the beginning of the map, cleaving down that first Matron.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't remember authorizing any remakes, but it seems like every time I've been on the desk, it's happened. Maybe I'm just the team's bad luck charm. Hopefully not for this match, though. Like you said, Method EU, Method NA, Clash the Titans, the Juggernauts coming back together. One thing we've seen Method EU do a couple times now is we've seen them not use their Bloodlust on the very first pull. They tend to be very picky with where they use it. They don't tend to do what most teams do, is just use it straight away, maybe try and get an extra usage in. They're very particular about what they want to do with it. For them, I think this game, it's not even so much about winning. It's just about sending a message. It's just about saying, look, okay, we had an off day. They were very vocal about that at the Spring Finals. You know, that wasn't us playing at our best. And they want to come in today and they want to show that they can actually destroy it. Both teams... oh, yes, this was what I was going to mention here, actually. Now said, and I'm not 100% sure what he's managed to do here, but he said he's not going to be running the Night Elf. He is going to be running the Dwarf to get rid of the Necrotic stacks. I didn't quite catch what he managed to do there.Maybe we'll get a little look at that afterwards. But both teams have managed to engage the first boss. Method NA slightly ahead. Method U have a little bit more count. At this point, it's only 3% though, so they'll easily be able to make that back up.
Yeah, it's a minor amount of count, no problem for them. The real danger, of course, with the affixes that we have here with Necrotic and Raging is a lot of the trash coming up, especially in Kragmaw's room, which we'll see pretty briefly coming up after the Elderly Axes on both sides here fall. There's just... First of all, we're in a Tides-heavy dungeon, so we have Tides everywhere, preventing crowd control and interrupts on several of the mobs in Kragmaw's room. And on top of it, you have a tank that is needing to kind of, you know, just be defensive, kind of backpedal, get away from mobs. It's very hard to CC mobs with all of those Tides out, so we're going to have to see how the two tanks handle it as those Necrotic stacks build up, and as the mobs hit Raging at 30%. Expect some of these tanks to really just kind of hightail it out of there with some heroic leaps as we see Method NA finish the boss first, get that mass stealth up, and just head on over into Kragmaw's room. Method EU following suit as well.
This is something we've seen a couple times. Tides, they tend to want to avoid them. They're bringing this one in, though. Like you say, you do want to be careful with this entire section. You've got Feral Bloodswarmers, Thirst for Blood, Fixate, Sonic Screech, Interrupt. You've got Wave of Decay from the Living Rot, which you can't interrupt if you're not playing these emissaries correctly. Disease Lashes, doing the 30-second disease.
Maggot, let's not forget that.
As well, the Maggot, that can't be stunned. The one advantage that I would say Method NA have in this section specifically is they do have Lighty. He does have a Dispel. He's going to be able to help JB out because, of course, the rest of Druids won't be able to Dispel. So if something, if one of these diseases does go through from the Disease Lashes, instead of having to force JB to heal it up, Lighty will be able to back him up and deal with it. One thing you do need to be very careful about in this room, and you'll see, you know, two very different playstyles from these two Resto Druids. Something that we saw earlier with... which one of the Druids was it? Which one of the game was it?
I don't know which one you're talking about here.
I've just completely blanked. Edelweiss.
Yes,
completely blanked on the name there.
That's what I said.
Yes, thank you. Edelweiss was playing a lot more defensively and a lot more healing focused, whereas Zayli is playing a lot more offensively. We do see Method EU have used that Bloodlust here. It's a weird one. I'm not... You know, we've seen many teams do this section and it's gone completely fine. They don't need to use the Bloodlust here. I'm not sure what the reasoning is there. Maybe just safety?
That's a big question mark for me. I mean, it allows them to be a bit more aggressive, of course, with the pull, but, I mean, how many more mobs are you going to gain out of this? An extra maybe 1 to 3?
It doesn't look like they have as well. It doesn't look like they've pulled anything extra. Maybe there was 1 or 2 mobs, which we didn't particularly see, but yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. It doesn't allow you to have a significantly, just pull an extra half the room or anything like that. So we'll see if this works out for Method EU, as Method NA, of course, have fallen a bit behind on the trash percentage as a result of that power move for Method EU with the use of Bloodlust. They've now grabbed the Death Speaker and the Guardians on top of the Maggot here, making sure that they can control everything properly and get interrupts on the Raised Dead, which was well interrupted there for Method EU. Now, they have to make sure as well, actually just that, as I said, that the Bloodseekers need to go down first. They just do an immense amount of damage, fixated on random players. The tank, outside of any support crowd control, can't really do much about that. Method NA is trying to catch up a bit here as they pull the remainder of the room, including the Guardians as well.
There is one thing to note here. Zayla needs to be very careful with his mana control. So we went a little, not too low there, we went a little bit low there. Like we were saying, if you are running out of mana, you have to stop and drink in between pulls. It's not that good. But on top of that, I'm pretty sure he's still running the Azure Staff from Queen Ajara. Now, this is one where in raids, we'll even see DPS using it. They'll opt to drop, very high-level weapons. I should probably say against their will. I don't think anybody particularly wants to do it. In our guild, we've had many complaints, but for progress, it's very good. In dungeons, it's very interesting because as long as you control your mana very well, you can basically force proc this, and it's just going to stack up throughout the entire dungeon. You're going to be saving up this massive amount of healing, which you can proc on demand, but you do have to be very careful that you don't accidentally, unintentionally proc it when you don't want to by just spamming your mana too hard. Otherwise, you'll be locked out of using that for 10 minutes, which is, that's, at this point, that's what, like half the dungeon?
Oh yeah, it is about based on the times that we've seen previously. Method NA wasting no time here and actually pulling the remainder of the trash on top of Kragmaw. Nothing too dangerous with this trash except, once again, the tank here. Yoda falls so low, does not proc the cheat death, but a lot of danger coming in on Nerf right now. I'm not sure if he has Stoneform available to him, just to be able to get rid of those necrotic stacks that are amassing quite quickly along with the boss. It's not exactly simple to get away from this boss unless they're doing the Tantrum or the Indigestion frontal, so they're really gonna have to down this trash quickly so that Nerf gets a bit of a breather. Method EU taking it a bit slower as a result, so they've dealt with their trash and have pulled Kragmaw a bit earlier. They're just a bit ahead of Method NA in terms of boss percentage and trash percentage at this point, but that move kind of helped Method NA catch up a fair bit there, Sierra.
When we look at the boss health percentages, they're actually moving at relatively the same pace. If anything, I think Method NA actually might be catching up. That gap's getting closer and closer and closer together. Gonna have to see how this works out for them, but it's a nice little pull there. One thing that we have seen, again, is healers playing offensively. This is something that we've seen. I'm going to keep on mentioning it, just because if you look at, JB, he's fully focused on damage now. Zalia's fully focused on damage now. They do have to be very careful because if tanks aren't playing around these mechanics properly, the indigestion, if they're taking that and not getting away from it, if they're, we saw Yoda accidentally getting clipped by, it was the indigestion, I think, at the beginning he got clipped by. Your healer doesn't be paying attention and making sure they heal up from that. That gap that I talked about, I said Method NA were pulling ahead, there was only sort of 5% difference. That seemed to disappear. I don't quite know what happened right towards the end there for Method EU, but they pulled out a huge amount of damage, widening that gap to about 10%. Both bosses have been down now, and we see Method EU move on to their third boss.
Method EU just have the capability to do that. They did that in previous series as well when they were actually a few percent behind the team against them, and they ended up just beating them on that boss by 15%. So Method EU can just always pull out a mass single target out of their pocket, but they have moved forward, and unfortunately Frag has actually popped his cheat death just because he does have the fixate from that Bloodswarmer in the group right now. Just shows you how dangerous it is. Is now backs up. He's at 39 stacks, 44 now. Finally pops his Racial from Dwarf and cleanses 44 stacks of necrotic off just like that. Won't be able again for 20 minutes, but for 2 minutes, excuse me. But Gingy actually procs the cheat death now as well. Just so much damage coming in from that Bloodswarmer that they refuse to kill off, and especially when it's raging, you just can't get that much support from the tank on it. So you have to just kill it before it kills you, or try to kite it around in a circle.
We've said this so many times with the rogues where, proccing a cheat death in the wrong place can be very, very costly. We've seen times where, you've accidentally done a little silly thing, you've procced the cheat death, you've actually then needed the cheat death and it's not been available. I don't mind Franklin popping it though. He made that was clearly a choice there. He said, I can do a huge amount of damage here if I stay in. Zalia, keep an eye on me. I'm going to proc this cheat death and make sure that I don't actually die when the cheat death has been proc. Just, give me a little top up, maybe use a little Hellstone there just to keep himself safe. I don't think that was a bad play though. As we see, Method EU just ever so slightly ahead. Trash percentages at this point exactly the same, 73% on both sides.
But interesting to note here, Method NA actually combined 2 of the Emissary of Tides from trash on top of the boss, something that Method EU is only now starting to do with the double Defiler. So basically 1 extra trash mob count for Method NA that could come in handy opportunity later on right now as they're cleaving it down on top of Spore Caller's Zancha, third boss of the dungeon. Everybody's favorite fun guy boss with all the mushrooms around. We can already see that the Defilers on Method and A side are marked off in the distance, so they'll be pulled in eventually, and you'll need a 2 DPS or 2 melee DPS rotation to make sure you stand on top of those interrupts for the Shadow Bolt volley and, of course, that Withering Curse. But Method of You, fair bit of damage coming in after that Harvest just hits the group, and Gingy is having a bit of a struggle to get healed up, but finally Zelia decides to start topping him up as the upheavals come out for the two teams.
That is the thing with Zelia. He does like to make those choices, and it is a choice. He will sit there and say, I know you're not going to die. As long as you don't do anything stupid, I can just sit, I can finish, I can get my dot going again so that I can maximize on my damage, make sure I don't lose any uptime. But it can be a bit risky, you know, in this cup setting, and in this game especially. Method EU will be feeling the pressure. They want to perform, they want to show that it was just a fluke, so I don't know, I like the offensive play. Maybe just reassure Gingy a little bit. Just, you know, throw him a heal. Just make sure he's feeling safe. Don't make anyone do anything silly by panicking.
I'm sure he's sending him a bunch of smiley faces and hearts in chat as we speak. But sometimes you got to risk it for the biscuit, Sierra. I mean, you have to go hard in these maps, especially with these two teams, particularly high-caliber teams, high-octane teams. You just... It's about just making sure those risks pay off, and you just can't be slow and composed when you're facing one of the Method teams here at the MDI. Method EU does finish the boss off just by mere moments before Method NA. I mean, just a few seconds here as they head off over to the Guardian pack right now. Method NA following suit has Shrouded as well and moved over to the same pack with an Emissary of Tides in there. They're going to want to make sure they get rid of that right away so that none of the Raised Dead casts go through.
Now, this is one of the things that we saw Abra do last season, was they actually ended up jumping and playing...
oh, there's a Raised Dead cast. Unlucky.
Playing Horde, trying to mix it around a little bit. But I think using the Dwarf for necrotic resets is the right play here. How much have they got left to do? They've got 17%, so they're not really that far away. Now, Zelia here, check out his mana. This is exactly what I was talking about. There wasn't really a massive amount of damage, particularly going on during that pull, and I think it's just, you know, not wanting to sit, not wanting to drink, not wanting to take a little second. You can see the Innovates there available. I don't know if that was necessarily the smart play. However, you do sort of want to think, where else are you going to use that stuff in that dungeon? You know, where are you going to need that big burst of focused healing that you can intentionally proc? You know, perhaps it might have been a better idea just to do something with some different stats on the weapon there.
But do they want focused healing or focused damage out of the staff is what you need to ask yourself, I guess, in this dungeon. I mean, their gear prowess and just player power, raw player power in this dungeon is so high. Method NA now 92%, Method EU 94%, as both teams are just desperately blade flurrying in front of the entrance to the final boss. Need to get to that 100% before they go downstairs. Another Abyssal Rich being cast here for Method EU. They don't want anything to do with that, especially when in raid, so they just completely move away from that area. Looks like Method EU is going to hit the 100% first, as Method NA still needs to deal with one of those hazard spaghettis on the left side of the screen that they're doing right now, and then they too will head downstairs. I mean, at this pace, assuming we're kind of just, you know, following the same trend of a pretty flawless run for both teams here, it looks like Method EU is probably going to grab this one first, Sarah.
Yeah, they do need to be very, very careful on this final boss, though. We've seen it many, many times where one team has been, you know, it's been a very, very close game, one team has been slightly ahead, and then the Druid dies. That's the one thing we really do not want to see here. Zelia and JB at this point, honestly, I would just be playing defensive. Like, I'd get my dots up, I'd get my damage rolling, and then I'd just be playing it as safe as I can, because if they die, at that point, you know, unless you're on a very, very low boss percentage, it can be over. And we've seen teams lose horrifically from a very strong lead. We do see Method A popping Bloodlust here as well. I'm sure Method EU will follow suit in a second. They don't have it right on the open, though. Just because they did that slightly delayed Bloodlust, I don't know. I don't like it.
Weird. I don't like it either. I don't back it. But nonetheless, I mean, they'll get it here in a sec, but it'll be after CDs have already been popped. Adrenaline Rushes are down for the Rogues. Avatar is down for now as well. Of course, he does have frequent access to that as a prot wearer, but does not sync up as nicely with Method NA. However, I don't think that the synergy of the full-blown CDs with Lust and the pre-pots available for Method NA is enough to catch up to Method EU. It's not like they completely lose the Bloodlust. They just popped it right now as we speak. So they'll probably still be able to pull ahead.
Definitely. It's very interesting as well, you know, talking to Now before the run, he said that actually he was expecting NA to take this game. He thought that, you know, that was they were stronger in that dungeon, that they're going to be stronger in the next dungeon. And it seems like this is very, very even, though. Maybe, you know, we have seen before these two teams, they do communicate a lot on strats. They do tend to share strats. I don't know if maybe in this particular setup they were maybe a little bit stingy and sort of holding off on revealing any key information that could lead the opposition to a win. Maybe a little bit of sort of friendly rivalry, but also not wanting to let the secrets out.
No, certainly don't want to let the secrets out, especially this early in the season leading up to BlizzCon. But Method EU does do it. They slap Method NA's hand out of the cookie jar, letting them know that they're still the big brother here, Jack.
Oof. These are my cookies, by the way, at home. You don't touch them. Method EU with a lightning run throughout Underrot there, taking the first game in the series here, 1-0. And it's ironic, that was an incredibly quick run. It almost seemed a little bit more of mirror runs, pretty close actions that both teams were putting together.
Yeah, that was an incredibly competitive run. And before we talk about exactly what both teams did, I kind of want to compare them, because we were talking about how Abracadabra had a fast run at like 16:20, and Pain for Fim was slightly behind at 16:24. Both of them were at like low 14s there.
Yeah.
In terms of the routing was exactly the same. The only thing that was different between these two teams was right here, this Bloodlust usage from Method EU on Trash and Kragmaw's room, which is a really interesting change from what we see most teams do. But it makes a lot of sense in Underrot, because this dungeon is fortified, and the only other place that we see teams using it is on Elderly Axa. But you don't have there's no danger on that fight. You know, the tank can spell reflect the blood bolts. No one ever wipes to that boss. So seeing that kind of change in how they use Bloodlust, that's probably what secured them this dungeon.
Yeah, we even kind of mentioned a little bit later on here, Sloot, they did end up getting their Bloodlust out against the last boss, but having that kind of delay, you know, whether or not it paid off for them, and you kind of mentioned you weren't really a big fan of it at first, holding off on that point.
I was a fan of it, them using on the Trash. I completely agree with Zyro that it's dangerous. What I wasn't a fan of is that it didn't line up at the end. But, you know, the more Zyro's mentioning and the more I thought about with it, just how fast the runs were in that dungeon. It reminds me of one of their first Waycrest runs.
I was about to say.
In the previous season, where they actually probably practiced for them to perfectly have Bloodlust available on the last boss. But they were just so fast through the dungeon out of practice that they got there and they're like, oh, oops, our Bloodlust is not up, so I guess we just go. But they probably practiced it to have it up for the boss, so I guess they'll have to adjust that for the future.
It's a good problem to have. They're like, oh, I guess we just went too fast.
Yeah.
Good one to have onto that one. So it will take us into game 2 onto a Taldazar on the other side of this break. So don't go anywhere, guys. The MDI with a Method v Method matchup. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. We're set and ready to go for game 2 right now between Method NA and Method EU right here on a Taldazar. Let's get to it, guys.
Let's get to it indeed. Taldazar, I mean, you know, a dungeon that is just kind of rings out classic BFA at the beginning of this, you know, just that feel-good dungeon that everybody knows about, just like DHT and HOV, of course, in Legion. Method NA and Method EU both going up the left. Now, we're going to keep our eyes peeled here, Sierra. Now, we've kind of heard through the grapevine that one of these teams has a pretty substantial pull coming up. Now, of course, if it doesn't work out, it'll just look like a miserable mess. But nonetheless, there should be something pretty substantial coming out from one of them.
Definitely, there are whisperings on the Method EU side that maybe Priestess Room is where we need to be looking. They didn't want to tell me anything. You know, usually they've been very open about their strats with me. They said, you know, this is what we're going to try. This is why we're doing it. This one, they said, nope, we are not letting anyone in on this one. We do see very standard pulls coming out from both of these teams, grabbing all the mobs at the back as well, making sure to kite them away from that Sanguini. You don't want to be sitting your mobs or yourself in there, Miraz and Gingy. You don't want to be taking damage from that. Again, you know, Zayli is not going to be all too happy. He wants to be DPSing, getting his dots up. They are going to move through in Priestess Room, and this is where all eyes for me are going to be on Method EU. What are they going to do? What are they going to bring? Apparently it's something new, something we haven't seen. Many options. What do you think?
Well, I mean, they're clearly going to bring 2 rogues, a Windwalker, a Warrior, and a Druid if you didn't look at the screen yet, Sierra. But we'll see what else they'll do in this room as Method EU approaches upstairs. A bit of clip damage, of course, from that fiery enchant coming out of that mob there. Of course, from the Augur. Mirror's dipping quite low here, too, just making sure he's nice and healthy. Azalea gets some emergency healing into him, drops down to 12% health. But they just do a pretty light pack. You know, this kind of reminds me of that Ritualist pack we were talking about on the side, but it's likely in preparation for cooldowns and getting ready for a substantial pull here on the side of Method EU as they just look to chisel down the rest of the Juggernaut and Augur health right now. Method NA has not wasted any time as they've gone straight into the room and pulled the Priestess and, of course, Priestess Alunza herself, the, well, in this case, the first boss of the dungeon for them, in a pretty substantial pull. They really have to control these Sanguine pools well, though.
They do indeed. I'm just trying to figure out, you know, we saw in earlier games where we've had this, like, the one Ritualist pull and Shrine, which is just one mob. I'm trying to figure out what the secret thing Method EU are sort of doing in here that's going to give them an advantage over Method NA. You know, Method NA, basically, they're not wasting any time. They're getting into that room, they're doing it efficiently, running in, pull the trash, boss, go. You know, no gaps in between. Method EU taking that sort of little gap, they're sort of waiting a bit, sort of trying to get everything set up in the way they want it to. Yeah, we'll have to see how it plays out for them. Priestess Lunza, though, a relatively standard boss for them, to be honest. The boss is going to do most of the work for them at this point. Now, this is probably the little sneaky thing they were talking about. Gingy running off, getting rid of that Emissary of the Tides, grabbing these mobs in. There are a couple of snaps.
Oh, but he died on the way!
And this is the problem when you try and do nice little sneaky things. So they've now had to use the combat res on him. It'll be interesting to see whether they go and do it again. Maybe Ginny's going to retry. Okay, Fragrance is going to go down. He's going to have a go at it this time. We'll keep an eye on him, see if he can do it any better. And at this point, the sort of whole, like, value of doing that at that point is completely wasted. Because, you know, the boss is almost gone at this point. They're probably going to end up finishing the boss, and then they're going to have to finish these mobs afterwards. I like the idea. Definitely the thought was there, you know, sort of trying to do something a little bit more creative. But at this point, you know, it wasn't that efficient time-wise going into the room. They've had this death, this whole nice little pull thing, which I like the idea of. It hasn't quite worked out how they wanted to. A Method NA, like we've seen in other games before, they're just going to take that opportunity. They're going to say, you've messed up, and now we're going to punish you for it.
A for effort, though, as far as that goes. Frag does pop his cheat death here. A lot of damage coming in for Method EU right now with the combined trash, and Alunza finally falls here as they look to clean up the rest of the Augur, something that Method NA is not working on. So Method EU in an ideal world would have been able to pull that all off together, but it was a bit costly to them. Gingy, of course, did pay for it with his life, and they did lose their battle res as a result. Not to mention Frag has proc cheat death during that whole ordeal. But Sierra, you know, one thing we failed to mention is that Alunza herself is not a pushover anymore. She used to be kind of a snoozer-loser boss before Season 3, and they actually gave her some pretty significant buffs in terms of the amount of damage she outputs with most of her AoE spells. So that, with the combination of trash, made it just a bit too dangerous for Method EU to sit back and play comfortably, and it did cost them just a bit there, as Method NA has now gone over and started snapping some of the swords, as we've typically seen in the second season, along with the Sky Screamer, getting ready probably at some point to dip down and get some damage into Razan and pull that as well. Method EU likely doing the same thing.
Love a little snapper moment, love seeing them do this. I'm sure we'll see them doing it many, many times. Method EU opting not to do that, probably just to help with the Sanguine management. They are going to drop down to Rezan, and they're going to pull it. This is very, aside from that little change on Priestess, which, you know, obviously, if it went well, it would have been very good. This is quite similar to Abra.
You're right, yeah. No, absolutely. We're going to see the Dino Snap here coming in for Method NA now that we've seen that in the previous season before as well. They have to be very careful with the swords that are about to die, as they're going to drop the Sanguini, Christini pools right under them. They don't care, though. As soon as that drops now, Nerf jumps down and snaps the Dinos downstairs, getting ready to combine it with Razan. It is going to be an absolutely dynamite pull here, combining the T-Rex and those Horidons, essentially, on the side, just getting ready as they come in a moment. But they have to be careful. You know, this was mentioned in the previous series here. I wasn't on the desk, but Razan plus Sanguine, not a very good combo. Razan is a very snoozer boss in terms of doing very long casts, starting to fixate, moving slowly. So if any of those dinos die in a bad spot, it's going to be pretty disastrous for Method NA here.
Now, one of the things I do like about this, though, is that pretty much all the mechanics, aside from the thrash there, can actually just be LOS'd. So this is something where most of it's going to be going on JB, and even if it doesn't, they can just jut behind this little staircase here, and then they don't really have to deal with those mechanics at all, which is something that, I mean, you can do it when you're upstairs. It's not that easy to do. Yeah, again, very similar to what Abra's doing. I think Abra was slightly unintentional, but they do have to be very careful now. These mobs are getting down very, very low. Those Sanguine pools are going to be spawning, and it doesn't seem like they're moving the mobs or Reza. Maybe he's just in a very good spot. That's very close.
That is very close.
That's very tight there. They have to be extremely careful with what they're doing.
Well, I mean, those Sanguine pools have to be within the center of his hitbox, right? So they're just, I mean, they're literal single digits of yards away from Razan right now. So, I mean, they're extremely practiced and confident with this particular pull here. As you can see, I mean, Nerf didn't even bother running away from the boss. He just went max melee range and kind of dropped the mobs along Razan's red circle hitbox just to make sure that they don't sink in there. Nerf just taking a bit of chunk damage, of course, from that debuff coming from the boss with the bleed. Does a fair bit, but nothing that he and JB cannot handle together as a team. Razan now down to 20% for Method EU, and Method NA only at 50% on the boss, but they do have a pretty substantial trash advantage right now with 73 versus Method E's 56.
This is the thing that we saw with Abra and Painful Femme as well, is that one team was focusing more on the bosses and one was focusing more on the trash. And in that game, the team that had more trash earlier seemed to do it quicker. I'm not sure if that's something that we'll see here. They're both putting in very, very good performance. Method EU, Rezan about to go down for them. Predictions on the middle pack. I'm intrigued to see if that's something they will play.
Are you talking about Method EU?
Method EU, yeah.
Because the middle pack's already done for Method NA at this point.
Oh yeah, we've been talking about it.
We have.
I mean, I'm intrigued to see if Method EU are going to follow suit. If they do, they probably should have just stamped it down.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It looks like they're prepping here for another snap pull on the side. We can already see now in position here for Method EU. They're at 56%, and I mean, if they do, it'll be soon, right? They usually do it on the side bridge here with a snap, but they actually do it. There it is right now. So Method EU has combined quite a big pull here. Not only the middle pack on top of it, some of the Sky Screamers as well with a ton of swords. So you got to make sure you move out quickly because the amount of Sanguine that piles up there from those small little swords is pretty substantial. Each pool, of course, it does stack, even if it's put in the same spot. Method NA now just finishing up, though, with Rezan, as Method EU essentially tries to kill off the rest of the trash that Method NA had already efficiently and well combined with Rezan. Upstairs they go, and right past where Method EU technically is.
For sure, so I was literally just about to point out that at this point, they've both killed Priestess, they've both killed Rezan. We can see at this point they're basically at the same stage in this dungeon. You know, sometimes teams will opt to go down to Rezan first, and then one team will go left, or, you know, a team might go right towards Valkal, and then it's quite difficult to be able to pinpoint who is actually ahead. You can get a rough idea, but at this point we can see that Method NA roughly 10% ahead in the trash. Method EU about to get a few more percent as they kill these final mobs off. They are going to be heading towards Valkal now. This is one of those bosses where, and at this point we need to talk about min-maxing. It's not something that you can just run and do it normally. We want to be seeing the spread damage on those totems. They want to be going down at exactly the same time. You want to see the healer contribute, you want to see the tank contribute, you want to make sure those explosives, no explosives going off. That's something that we've seen previously in this dungeon, where explosives going off in the wrong place, somebody dropped a little bit low, they've wasted at a cheat death, and again it goes back to, we saw some cheat deaths proccing earlier. It seems like most of them are pretty much off cooldown now, so if at any point they do unfortunately make a mistake, they will have that safety net there available to them.
But, you know, it really should be no problem with the explosives. The explosives spawn near entities. So as long as you keep the boss near one of the 3 totems, you're always guaranteeing that an orb will spawn near one of the totems, where likely they're going to position at least 1 rogue per, and the rogues can easily just flurry those down in a matter of moments. Method NA now dealing a pretty substantial pull here after the Emissary of Ties that they skipped that was stacked with that Sky Screamer. They did well to first sap it and then, of course, root it as they pulled the Sky Screamer out of the pack so that they can get the interrupts on that AoE fear. Method EU is hot on their tail right now as both teams are looking to kill off the rest of the trash on the stairs leading up to Volkal with a rather mean pull that everybody skips. Now, fortunately, this is not a Void Enchanted Dungeon, as usually there's a Void right there in the middle of that pack in front of the boss, and you're unable to shroud. But the Blizzard Gods were merciful on this one at the MDI, so we don't have to deal with that mess here, as the 3 rogues do indeed split off for both teams and get ready to get these totems down ASAP.
Let's hope they won't be so merciful next week, because that's very fun to watch. It's not fun to do, but it's fun to watch them.
Yeah, but we don't have to do it.
Exactly, that's what I mean. We're sat on the desk, we're chilling, we're having a good time. Very fun to watch, not to play. They do start very efficiently on Volkal. Looks like one of the totems is slightly ahead of the others for Method EU. There's nothing that they won't be able to clear out with too much difficulty. Method NA maybe letting one of their totems go a little bit higher, but it's alright. They do progress into the second phase. At this point they are neck and neck. Whatever happened previously with the weird Priestess stuff is completely irrelevant at this point. It's only a 5-second difference on the death timer. Method EU slightly ahead here, but it is very, very neck and neck.
Yeah, you know, it's something out of a horror movie, the weird Priestess stuff that you were talking about earlier. But let's just move past that one right now. Method EU do indeed, and it could be critical by the end of the dungeon, have that 5 seconds extra death penalty on the board earlier. They did commit a battle rest to it. Both teams going to get their bloodlust up soon, but they will, of course, save it likely for the final boss of the dungeon, Yasma. Now, Volkal is just a boss that, you know, we all know it already inside and out. Of course, has that aura where he damages himself, and a tremendous amount of pulsing on the players as well. Now, this boss, if I'm not mistaken, Sierra, along with Priestess Alunza, were actually both hit by the buff that essentially in patch 8.2. So the AoE pulsing from Volkal is actually substantially more damaging than it used to be in the previous season. So it's something to watch out for, and it's definitely putting the healers on a more defensive heal here.
definitely, you really need to pick your moments as a healer to DPS. We do see Xaylia and JV pumping both over 20k for JV and 23 nearly for Xaylia. You do have to be very, very careful though. What you'll see with this boss is that, like you say, it is ticking damage. It's not necessarily big bursty damage where you have to be, particularly afraid. And what you'll see these Restitures doing is just dropping an F low. They'll stick a Wild Growth every now and again, and they'll basically go, you know what, the rest of it, you deal with it. Use a defensive, use a health bar, I don't really care, I want a DPS, but they do need to be very, very careful when they're doing this because, as you can see, Gingy's dropping, it's not dangerous levels, it's not to the point that he's going to die, but it's to the point where he's a little bit uncomfortable, and then, I'm sure once they finish this boss, they'll just top him off and they'll move on to the next boss because they are fully done with their trash on both sides.
Both of them, I mean, within certainly less than 5 seconds on each run right there, but it's important to note, I mean, the monks can help dispel at least one of the diseases that comes out from Volcall, but neither of them on either side tried to help out with that. They're just all sight on maximum DPS while letting the healers kind of just heal through one of extra damage over time effects from Volcall more. Method has now started their RP as Method are heading up the stairs. This is a close one, Twitch chat and those at home right now, as Frag unfortunately gets hit by a spider on the way up the stairs, but fortunately does not finish him off, and they're about to pull Yasma here, wasting absolutely no time. Method EU, here we go. Bloodlust has been popped for them. They do have to win this boss by 5 seconds or more in order to overcome the death counter.
So, did a rough count in my head there. It was about 5 seconds between them when they pulled. So really, Method EU just need to go full steam ahead. They can take this game. They can get that redemption that they've been seeking so hard. I wasn't 100% sure if that Bloodlust was going to be up for this boss, but they have, showed that they can time those Bloodlusts properly when they want to. They had a very standard run by the looks of it for them. They're going to be doing as much damage as they can, especially considering that at some point, this room's going to get massively filled with spiders. And we've seen for some other teams that's been a bit of a pitfall for them, where, to start off with, there's not that many. It's very easy to dodge. You'll just do a little sort of square polka dance around the room, and then as it gets more filled up and as those nerves creep in, maybe they are fully aware that there's only like a 5% difference. Maybe they do have it on the second screen. Maybe they're glancing over and just being like, okay boys, this is close. Maybe they are feeling the pressure. Hopefully not. I hope they can hold it together because I would love to see them, even despite that little pre-test mishap, be able to win this game. I think it'd be very good for their confidence, very good for their mentality going forward into other series.
Certainly will. Both teams polka dancing around all the spiders as some of the pools are put down on the side of Method and A in the corner, and they deal with, of course, the ghosts on the side, just leaving them out of the pack, making sure to flurry them down as they come in. This match might certainly be decided by the amount of 5 rolls that we get on the Outlaw Rogues here, so it is just so neck and neck right now, and Method EU has already shown in previous series just what their prowess is like for that single target damage, and indeed we see it here right now. 10% difference between the two teams on this boss right now. Cooldowns should actually not really coming up. We just saw Avatar popped here from Nerf Tank. There's not really too many cooldowns, too many bursty cooldowns to come out of these two teams, as Method EU just pulls further and further ahead at this point now, 13-14%.
They do have, well, you do have to remember there is that 5-second death penalty on the side of Method EU. Like you say, though, when they get down into these low 30%, 20%, they do just seem to find this big, huge burst of single target damage out there. They definitely know when they want to pull it out. 3% left on Method EU's side. Will Method A be able to muster up the damage that they need to be able to claim this victory? There is a 5-second difference as Yasma goes down. 5, 4, 3,
Unfortunately,
2, 1.
Not enough.
2%. That's got to be gutting for them. That has to be gutting for them.
Oh, that is incredibly close there on that Ataldazar series. Both teams taking some differences in their own routes, but coming so close together at the finish on that one's ironic. That was a sight to see.
Yeah, I mean, if there was any doubt in your mind coming into this series whether or not these were the two best teams in this entire cup, I mean, you have it right here from these two maps. These guys are neck and neck. The times were so much faster than any other times we've seen in these maps this entire tournament. These guys are just crazy. And, I mean, the whole story of the map there is they were just neck and neck the entire time. There were one or two things the teams did differently, but, all in all, they were neck and neck until the last second.
At the last second, and even just being able to look at how they were able to start getting some of those snap pulls together, that was incredible too.
Yeah, and there were a couple small mistakes. The one hiccup we saw from EU was this really unfortunate pull from Gingy where he cloaked going down and his cloak ran out mid hook, so a little unfortunate from them. But the bosses were neck and neck the entire way through. But I think I kind of want to highlight one of the things these teams do differently than other teams that's really important for them. And when we get to the clip, I'll show you guys. But they kind of played out their movement differently from other teams. And in this day and age, we're in the second season of of BFA dungeons. They've got things figured out. The trash count's figured out. The way you run through the dungeon is pretty much figured out. You kind of have to innovate with new pulls to actually compete with the top teams. And one of the things Shakib does here is they put together about 4 trash pulls together at the same time, when normally we'll see teams do those pulls, twice at a time. It's coming up here in a second, I believe. Trust me, we'll have the clip ready in a second. But it's just something that they do so much better than every other team.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is when you're able to watch back from a lot of these groups, how they're putting together those pulls, how they're getting everything grouped up is always very interesting to be able to see. And when we're looking at the snap points, for example, for Ataldazar, like you mentioned before, those are so key and they're so important, and executing well worked out really well.
I mean,
it did work very well.
They did execute pretty cool. Here's the pull right here, and you can see fantastic observation. Shout out to the obs, by the way. You see Shakib, he pre-tricks Nerf here, ran around the side, stealth past the Sky Screamers, and then he ran up and pulled both of these 2 sword packs, tricks them to the tank. So instead of doing 2 separate pulls, they're tricksing 4 sword packs to this snap point all at the same time, and they're able to deal with them efficiently. Now, of course, both of the rogues end up dropping incredibly low, and I believe proccing their cheat, but for the efficiency of the pull they just did, that's great right there. That's the innovation I want to see from these teams moving forward.
He was on a journey on that one. You're being able to watch those back from these teams to be able to see how much it's taking for them to be able to get to it. And you're even seeing right here from the score right there, 15-12 to 15-08. So incredibly close on that one.
And one other thing, actually, Method NA should have had this dungeon. The only reason Method EU won this dungeon, they procced the staircase RP before Method NA did.
Very, very cool, too, to be able to start seeing. You're just looking at the whole team waiting there as they're moving on up to the boss. And that 5-second difference as well, to think about it. They had to have somebody else go downstairs as they were leaving the Priestess Alun's room to be able to pull those mobs once again, get them back upstairs. So, if anything, Method EU could have been a lot faster there, Salute, if they didn't have that early death from Gingy.
It could have been. I mean, both teams had some new innovative pulls that they tried to do. Method NA, the coin flip worked out for them. We heard that they were not maybe the most confident about it, but if they were to pull it off, it would have been stellar, and it was stellar, as you mentioned. Method EU tried something on their end, obviously didn't work out. Gingy kind of got gibbed on the way back up. His cloak just ran out back at mid-flame, so he got breathed on there. But, I mean, if it had gone the other way, just a split second in favor of Gingy there, then they would have been just fine, and they would have pulled it out even faster.
They really would have. So as we take a look at our bracket going forward onto this one, Method EU is going to be moving on off the back of that win there. So they're going to be joining Abracadabra in the upper final.